Welcome to the Sooners 360 Recruiting Podcast, a podcast for OU recruiting fans by Sooners 360. Each week we catch you up on the latest in OU recruiting news and provide opinions and evaluations on all things OU recruiting. I'm Chris Mason, lead recruit analyst for Sooners 360. This podcast is now sponsored by Sooners 360 on Patreon. To support this podcast, please go to patreon.com/Sooners360-817 and click subscribe. It's only $2 a month and there's also a free trial option. And I'm posting all of my regular recruiting content over there. Also, this podcast is now part of the Believe podcast family. Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is episode 86, one big hit and one big loss. So let's just jump right into it and get to the recruiting news. So as always, we lead off with commitment news if there's commitment news to talk about. And fortunately, on Saturday, July 6th, I'm recording this late Sunday night, Omarion Robinson, the safety defensive back from Arkansas, committed to the Sooners. His commitment announcement was around 4 o'clock Central Time on Saturday, which made for a nice recovery from the bad news we'll get to in a minute. Omarion is a player who has visited OU several times. He's been to campus on several occasions, and he just had his official visit during the Champ U barbecue event on 6/21. Prior to that, he had just visited Oregon, and Oregon is on a little bit of a heater recruiting wise, and had grabbed a lead with him. For those that don't know, Oregon's just grabbed Decorian Moore from Texas, Jordan Dave, the 5-star wide receiver, 5-star running back on some services, Jordan Davidson, managed to snag him from, looks like probably Ohio State, maybe was their biggest competition there. And obviously they grabbed tight end from Wichita, from the Kansas area, Deshaun Brom, who OU was interested in at one point, but really wasn't a factor at the end. So to beat Oregon for safety right now, that's big. That's somewhat big recruiting news. Omarion also was considering Arkansas at LSU. So so those four schools, I mean, especially LSU and Oregon in terms of competition, that's pretty big time. Oregon's, got a top 5 class. LSU is well known for defensive back recruiting. They also have their elite DB coach from the past, Corey Raymond, back. So beating LSU and Oregon, just that alone, that's a big win. His ranking, he's somewhere in the top 150 territory with On3. With Rivals. Rivals has him ranked 121st of the nation. ESPN has him as a 4-star. And then he's really close to 4-star status on 247. Once again, we find On3 as a major outlier here. They have him ranked 59th in the nation in terms of a safety prospect. And that's just ridiculous, just like it was with Darius Afalava. I'm not really sure. Some of On3's rankings are just all over the place. It's a little strange where they are. I can say that on Twitter, Omarion was recently at the 5-star Rivals event, won the defensive back MVP trophy, and on Rivals recruiting guy Adam Gorney has been talking about Omarion as being one of the top safeties, if not the top safety in the country. So his Rivals ranking is probably going to go up, probably putting him firmly in the top 100. And I wouldn't be surprised if 247 and ESPN don't adjust where they have him. On3, I can't speak for what they're doing with some of their outlier rankings. It's a little weird. So what is OU getting in terms of what do I see on film? Well, his first couple of highlights are some fantastic looking kickoff and punt returns, special teams touchdowns where he's showing explosive burst, excellent speed, and is just, it's very, and I said it's kind of Antonio Perkins like a little bit with the way he cuts and then just goes. So those highlights are great. But we're looking at a safety. So what do we see in his safety film? He's very comfortable playing kind of that deep center field safety position. A lot of safeties, sometimes when you're watching their highlight reels, they're playmakers for their high schools, so they're usually kept at the line of scrimmage, a lot of in the box play, blitzing, just because they're often the most athletic, best defender. With Omarion, you actually get a chance to see him playing that sort of. He's very comfortable being off the line, in coverage, being a deep safety. Number of highlights where you're seeing deep passes where he's rolling over to cover the wide receiver and stopping the pass play or intercepting the pass before the wide receiver can make a play on the ball. So he's very comfortable there. Shows excellent burst in terms of getting over to recover and basically spotting what's going on, cutting over. He's, like I said, he's got excellent speed. He's got good size. He's probably 6 foot, 185 pounds, somewhere in that range. He is comfortable coming up and playing the run and being physical. You see that in his highlights as well. So it's really, he's really sort of an all-round safety, but he is giving you that center field kind of safety play that sometimes you just don't see with safeties in their highlight reels, because again, often they're just playing so close to the line of scrimmage. What does this mean for defensive back recruiting? Well, it pretty much puts a bow on a 2025 class that I have previously on other pods kind of raved about. Jay Valai and Brandon Hall have done a great job with this 5-player class. Wimberly, the other safety from Arkansas that Brandon Hall was able to get, he's a slightly bigger kid, 6 foot, 6'1", 200 pounds, in great shape, really good athlete. So when you combine him with Robinson, so Marcus Wimberly with Robinson, you're really kind of getting the best combo. So it's almost where the combination of the two is higher rated than their individual rankings from a certain perspective, because they just have such complementary skills and size and frame. So it's a position where you're getting an ideal safety pair. And then you talk about adding that to the 3 cornerback group that OU has. Tristan Haynes, who just has elite speed and athleticism, very similar to kind of Jacoby Johnson in that way. Then Cortland Guillory, who could play safety, could play cornerback, very physical. And then you got Malik Hawkins, very physical too. And all of those guys have good size. So when you're talking about a 5-player group to come after last year's class, where you have Jeremiah Newcomb and Devon Jordan, who are just elite athletes at cornerback. They're slightly not quite as big in frame as the guys this year. But when you combine the two groups, it's just a great combination of skills and abilities. And again, this group, when combined with Jaden Hardy, Michael Boganowski, and Powers, those 3 guys plus Wimberly plus Michael Patterson McDonald and plus Omarion Robinson, you're talking, you've got 5-6 safeties. You combine those groups and you've got a nice you can mix them around. Like if you've got 3 safeties, you could play out of that 6 group of guys that you signed in the last 2 classes. And that just gives you're just stacking talent in the defensive back room, back-to-back classes. You've got Peyton Bowen and Makari Vickers and Jacoby Johnson. You still got the holdovers from 2022 in Gentry Williams and Robert Spears Jennings. There's even been a Jaden Rose sighting and some workout videos. If he could ever put that together with his be completely healthy, that could be one of those reclamation kind of, where did this guy come from kind of projects. Who knows? I mean, he's got all the physical gifts in the world if he can stay healthy and get coached up. So DB recruiting is really, it's got a 3-year path of it with almost 4-year, 2022, 23, 24, now 25, where you've got just excellent talent and depth, and it's transformed that room. And I think Hall and Valai are probably the best DB coaching pair that OU's had in a long, long time. For those that fans haven't been around quite as long, OU's really struggled a little bit to find the right DB coaching pair since Mike left the first time. Hasn't quite. And to have a safety and cornerback pair like these guys, like these two that work so well both in coaching and recruiting, it's a really positive sign as OU moves into SEC land, and taking two safeties from SEC land, from Arkansas. It's pretty rare for OU to be that successful in Arkansas. Arkansas usually does a good job keeping kids at home, or they've traditionally been going to other SEC schools. So big wins, getting Robinson. Again, OU had him targeted fairly early and hasn't, if you've noticed, I've not been talking about a lot of safety prospects that much at all. OU got Wimberly pretty early, and Wimberly was probably heading to Michigan. And I think that shows how underrated he is. I think because Michigan, obviously, that staff been doing a good job for, finding and recruiting and developing players. So, we haven't been talking about safety offers that much at all, because OU was really, I think it was going to be Robinson, or they were going to probably keep the ship back and move on to the next class, because they did sign, 3-4 safeties in the previous class. So when you combine everything, Marcus Wimberly would have been fine, and then you just move on to 2026 and, perhaps sign an extra safety. I don't think OU makes any more offers at safety, pretty much closes everything down. Does the Jonah Williams thing resurface? It's hard to tell right now. It doesn't seem like there's much action there, but originally Jonah was talking about taking an OU visit in the fall. So maybe he re-engages with OU once his senior season starts. Maybe he doesn't. But if everything just stands pat, I think you'd probably, it's not quite there yet, but I think you'd have to give the safety class, I think 2 safeties is good from a quantity number and quality number. I think both of these guys are, Wimberly's going to end up, I think, rising up in the rankings as well. And I think Robinson, could be a composite top 100 by the time everything's done. So, I'd definitely give that quantity-wise, that's an A, 2 guys, very much what you needed. Works with, that gives you 6 safeties over 2 classes. You're playing 3 safeties, that gives you good depth. And then quality-wise, I probably would give it something like depending upon how the rankings shake out, something like a B+ or an A-. Just think Robinson's really that good that, he's just, I think he's one of those he might be one of the gems of the class that we don't quite realize right now, but by the time the rankings all shake out, we're like, oh, he's the number 80 player in the nation. And we just weren't quite giving him that level of, recruiting rankings respect when he verbaled. But like I said, his film is just fantastic. So that's the good. So let's get to the bad. So Lamont Rogers, despite some trends, the last couple of weeks, the trend line had been potentially OU. He'd been talking, a lot of services were talking about that. It looked like OU was in a good place. I certainly thought OU was in a good place. It seemed like maybe his stakeholders were wanting him to be developed by Bill and go to OU. His mom seemed like had a great OU visit. But late last week, around Wednesday, Thursday, right around July 4th, it popped up that Mizzou had moved into the front. And I think OU obviously did their best efforts to try and dislodge that. But Lamont Rogers, around 1 o'clock Central Time, or noon Central Time, on his Instagram feed, picked Mizzou. His mom didn't seem overly enthused about that decision on the video, but nonetheless, he picked Mizzou. No reason to presume this verbal is not going to stick. Is it an NIL loss? Without knowing What the offers are, it's hard for me to tell. Did OU just get out recruited? Quite possibly. Did Lamont just prefer Missouri for whatever reason? Possibly. He doesn't give a lot of interviews, not a lot of social media posts or anything like that. So for right now, he's chosen Missouri. No signs that there's going to be any wavering there. Something could, if everyone's like, oh well, he hasn't signed yet. Well, yeah, that's the true of every commitment with every team in every country, and I'm not going to hedge and say with everything that goes on, either positive or negatively for OU, that they could sign somewhere else. That's true for all of OU's commitments. So right now he's going to Missouri, and OU needs to be planning along those lines. What does this do to O-line recruiting? So Ty Haywood appears to be out of the picture, and at least he is out of the picture until we have positive signs that he's in Norman for an event or a visit. Until he does that, he's not under consideration. It's Alabama or FSU based upon his last interview that I really saw. And everyone's presuming it's going to be Alabama, which I think is a really good, which is the best guess right now. So Lamont Rogers going to Missouri. So you are down to 2 of the 4 offensive tackles or offensive linemen, uncommitted offensive linemen that you had visit in June. Andrew Babalola from Kansas City, who prior to the OU visit was rumored to be leaning to Stanford. He also visited Michigan before he visited OU, and he also visited Auburn. So it's hard to know where OU is in that battle. The Stanford push has a heavy academic flair to it. Michigan seems to be maybe a middle road between academics and football. Auburn is all football. And OU obviously laid out the red carpet for Babalola on his weekend visit and pushed the academics as well as they could. And obviously has a big football advantage, I think, over everyone but Michigan. And Michigan's obviously lost Jim Harbaugh. Sharon Moore's still there, but we don't know what the rebuilt Michigan staff is going to look like on the field. So, I would say OU somewhere in that mix. We don't have a decision date or a time frame yet. Maybe by the end of July. So that's Andrew Babalola. Now, the other guy is Michael Fasusi from Louisville, north of Dallas. Down to OU in Texas, that would be everyone's guess. Texas was the presumed leader from about, April through May. The official visits hit. It looked like OU's official visit hit harder with Michael than the Texas one. We don't have a decision date. I would say August is probably a good guess. Sometime before sometimes when his camp starts or before his camp starts, something along those lines. That's what he said. And that's what he said in public interviews before, is that's when he would like to have made a decision. So has OU maybe grabbed a lead with Fasusi? It's a possibility. The only issue here is Texas has taken a beating in recruiting the last sort of 10 days. We'll mention Brandon Brown in a minute, but Texas has lost 4 defensive tackle targets, and one of those was a verbal commitment. They lost to Corian Moore. They lost Riley Pettijohn. They're just taking some big hits in recruiting, and it just makes me wonder how all in Texas will go with the Fasusi recruiting, because he's the only offensive tackle they have left. He's always been their only real target at offensive tackle. They try to make a run at Rodgers. It doesn't seem to have really gone anywhere. So, if Texas was to lose Fasusi, that would be basically 3 5-star talents that they allegedly led on that they would have lost in the last sort of 30 days, presuming Fasusi drops like in the next 3-4 weeks. So, but conversely, Fasusi's also gone much higher on OU's need list too. Presuming that Babalola goes with Stanford or Michigan, which let's just say he's going to go the academic route, that leaves Fasusi as the last option for OU in the offensive tackle mix from the guys who visited. So if OU doesn't want to go 0 for 4 on offensive tackles that visited in June, which would be optically terrible, strategically bad, and leave OU still needing 2 offensive linemen. So basically, sort of triple blow there. You got to figure that OU is also doubling any and all efforts with Fasusi as well. That this is heading towards an OU Texas showdown, and if I'm OU at this point, I'm telling Fasusi we're matching whatever Texas does. If it's NIL, that's going to be the final decision factor. Just match, because you need the Fasusi and Ryan Foje as your pair of offensive tackles in this class. Basically erases any real questions there. You've got 2 elite-looking offensive line players out of this class. You can go find a 5th offensive lineman this fall, and you're in good shape. You've got some time to think about who you want that to be, and you've got all fall to make that happen. If you miss Fasusi, you need 2, and the offers need to start happening. You getting 1 in the fall. Okay, that's not that hard. Getting 2, that starts to become problematic, and you've obviously got to deal with the fact that you've gone 0 for 4 on the arguably the 3 highest players you had a chance to sign. That stings, that hurts, that's not what you need first year going into the SEC. So that's O-line recruiting right now. Obviously, Missouri got another verbal from, I believe, Caton Page. I'll have to go back and look at his film, but last time I looked at it, he looked like he was a guard to me. So I'm not sure that's a big blow in terms of someone who you could have offered. And God, you got Afalava at guard. The last 2 guys in this recruiting class at offensive line need to be tackles. Now, if one of them is a guard tackle combo, right tackle, guard combo, that's fine. But one of them needs to be a legit tackle prospect. So that's the news at O-line, and it's been tearing up message boards. It's been the threads all over every message board, free or premium, around the Sooner world, are just, Bill's been fired, hired, rehired, fired again about 1,000 times on various message boards. I think it would be less of an impact if there wasn't this perception that OU was leading for 10 days and then out of nowhere it flipped back to Missouri. So I think that's what's really causing even more of the angst around for Sooner fans. Is I thought we led here, or we were being told we led here, and then Missouri sort of out of nowhere. And I don't think it was out of nowhere. Obviously, Missouri was a factor here that but it seemed a little bit like everything was going good. And then, to use a really old reference, it's like, Charlie Brown and then Lucy just, we thought we had an offense. We thought we were getting a lead offensive lineman, thought we were getting a tackle we needed. And then, the football got pulled out from Charlie Brown again and we hit the ground. So, really need to recover with either Babalola or Fasusi. If you do that, then you just move on. It's everything is in okay shape. That's fine. Everything's that's fine. So there were some other announcements. I don't know how much OU was really the end result here. Georgia defensive tackle Mekhi Williams-Lee committed to NC State like everyone thought. I don't think OU was pushing that much at the end. Brandon Brown from Florida, the UT commit, flipped to, chose LSU. OU, I think, might have been second, had passed Texas there. Why did Texas lose this guy? Well, he'd been verbal to Texas since last December. Texas lost their defensive line coach, who went to LSU. So that's why I think Brown flipped to the Bayou Bengals, who have been desperate for defensive line help. I'll admit I was not a huge fan of Brandon Brown's film. I don't think it's as good as Kamari Moore's film, and I think they're very much similar players. Brown's not anywhere near what Trent Wilson is at 3-tech, and I think Kamari Moore is a bigger framed, bigger. He's a true nose guard, and I think Brown probably was a nose guard for OU, and it just doesn't bring anything that Kamari Moore doesn't already have. So that is leaving D-line recruiting because of the Cole Brewer and Christian Evans mess. Well, not mess, but just losing guys that you thought we had a better chance at. It does leave it down to Floyd Boucard and Floyd Boucard only. So we'll give an update with him in just a minute. But D-line recruiting is, especially defensive tackle recruiting, it's only Wilson and Moore right now. You'd like to add another player there. So it'll be interesting to see how that mix all occurs. So let's move on to the other targets, that 2025 targets that are still active. Still there's only a couple of guys that visited Norman in June that are not committed to OU or committed elsewhere. So other than the two offensive linemen, we're down to Cade Piatrak. No update on the decision, but he's sort of like of all the guys, he has like the least social media presence, does the least interviews. We may just find out he's verbal to OU. Piatrak would be key because I think he's a 3-tech in the future, so that would give you another defensive lineman. Obviously, he could be a big defensive end too. Combine him with C.J. Nixon and Shield Knight, and maybe defensive end doesn't need another player. So he's kind of a key swing guy. If you can get him, then I think he's got positional versatility where you're like, well, we'll just sign him, and then he could play. He could be 3 different things for us. He could be a defensive end. He could be a big 3-4 defensive end, or he could be a pass rushing 3-tech at defensive tackle, because he's 6'5", 260, and could be 6'5", 280 really before, after his first year in Norman. Christian Jones, the linebacker from Nebraska, with everything that's gone on, he's the only linebacker recruit that has visited, that hasn't committed elsewhere. Not sure what his decision time frame is. Seen some forecasts for OU lately from the Rivals OU writer, Parker Thune, and then we saw one from Rivals Penn State in the last day or two, but I'm not sure if that's just a reaction to what Parker put out. He would be an excellent linebacker combo with Marcus James. Just very athletic, long, very comfortable in space, but still physical. So as a combo to perhaps the behemoth middle linebacker that Marcus James could become, 6'4", 245, and just, athleticism everywhere, physicality. He would be a nice linebacker combo with Marcus James in the future. So keeping track of that, obviously he's ranked the top 100 by Rivals, and he's on 3 again as the outlier. But he's very well regarded, very well ranked. And then Floyd Boucard seems to be, he's publicly said that he's leading towards a decision July 20th. He has not seen any of his teams play football. I think he would like to go to a couple of games. So I think that's in the interesting part of this mix too. It looks like it's a USC OU and maybe Miami battle. I think folks sometimes are misreading the fact that he's at Miami Central. He's a Quebec native. He's sort of an exchange student down there. So he's not like a Miami native. He doesn't have a lot of history in Miami or a lot of connections in Miami, to the best of my information. He really liked his USC visit. I think he liked LA, and I think, USC put on kind of a little glitz and glam. OU obviously focused a very different message. So that one's trending to a decision in late July. OU misses Floyd Bacard. Bates, you can't, and they don't get, and you get Pietrek. Maybe you stick where you are and move on to 26. But I kind of think you're a defensive tackle short with just Wilson and Moore. So Bacard takes on, it's the two offensive tackles and Bacard. Obviously, you want to get Christian James and Pietrek, but the focus, heavily has got to be on Bacard in the offensive tackles. So one thing on this podcast we're going to start to do is we kind of need to turn the page to 2026. So I need to start talking about a lot of new names and a lot of new players, because OU is at 21 commitments right now. And there's a very good chance that if things go positively for OU with a couple of kids, that OU could be all but done by the time they play their first football game. If they get Pietrek and Bacard, they got Christian Jones, they could pick up an offensive tackle. They would pretty much be an offensive tackle away from closing this class up, barring some new offers or some new level of interest from a national prospect that OU has been working behind the scenes with. And I don't have any information on that. I'm not keeping anything from you guys, but OU obviously continues to send messages and mail out to folks. And if they get a hot start in the SEC, maybe someone decides, I want to give OU a visit, and OU takes a gamble on it. And just like with Marcus Harris, sometimes those gambles can land. Sometimes with like Elijah Melendez, the guy doesn't end up flipping from the school, and you're not able to, you're not seeing the tangible benefit of it. So that could be, so honestly, by, the week of September 1st, first game week, this podcast could be saying, well, OU's at 25 verbals and we're done with 2025. So let's move to 2026, and we'll start with a new name for you guys to track. So it looks like OU is holding an event, which I believe the correct name is Night Under the Stars, and that is for 2026 and 2027 players. It's going to be around the weekend of July 26th, probably the ability for guys to come in Friday, Saturday. And the first name, according to his social media traffic, his posts, we have a new name to confirm, a new name to track in recruiting. So that event likely will have Jaden O'Neal there. He's talking about wanting to build a class, be the ringleader for a class. Well, you do that by, Kevin Sperry showed up last year at this event, recruited all the in-state kids. OU got verbal commitments from Kamori Moore and Elijah Thomas directly out of the event, and then landed the two Carl Albert kids, Trinae Washington and Marcus James, about a month later. So OU made momentum in 2025 coming out of this event. So I would imagine Jaden O'Neal will be there. I'd imagine OU will have their other two verbal commits, Jonathan Hatton, the running back from San Antonio, and Ryder Mix, the tight end from the Dallas area. So I think, haven't seen anything publicly from them, but usually, you want your verbal commitments there. You want them driving the message with the kids, forming that bond, forming those connections. But we do have another name that's confirmed visiting, and it's a pretty big name. It's, at least according to the early rankings right now, it is a 4-star athlete. I would say wide receiver, based upon a quick view of his film. It's Brandon Arrington from California. He is the number, according to On3 right now, their composite. He is the number 20 player in the nation and the number 3 player out of California. He is ranked as high as number 7 in the country by both On3 and ESPN. And 247 and Rivals both have him in the top 100. So he's obviously he's a very highly ranked athlete. He's visiting OU. Then he can take a couple other visits to other campuses during that week. So OU will get a chance to put on their best message. Jaden O'Neal will get a chance to put on his best selling job to fellow Californian Brandon Arrington about why OU should be in his top 3, or he should take an official visit to OU and consider OU. So that's the first name, and we'll keep track of those names and go into some more detail on this podcast with the 2026 kids, so you guys can start becoming familiar with some names, some players to watch, targets, as the Night Under the Stars event gets closer and closer, while we're waiting for some movement with the remaining 5 or 6 guys OU's recruiting with for 25, or waiting for some new names, some new offers, some information that OU's pushing for some previous offers, perhaps, who have verbaled elsewhere. We're in a little bit of a lull with 2025 as we wait for these last few names, and we wait for any movement from OU in terms of targeting new names. So while we're doing that, we'll start the what I will call the education process of 2026 recruiting, because OU's gonna be doing a lot of 26 recruiting this fall, because most of the staff is gonna be done. Like I said, August 30th. It could be Bill Biedenbow and Todd Bates are the only guys still looking for prospects. So the rest of the staff could have turned the page and be completely moved on, especially Emmett Jones. DeMarco Murray's already moved on. Joe John Finley's already moved on. So we definitely need a linebacker class, bigger linebacker class in 2026. That's something to watch. So we'll start talking about some of those themes in the next couple of weeks. So thanks everyone for listening. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast, and don't forget to leave a positive rating. This podcast will also be up on YouTube if you prefer that medium. Just look for Sooners 360 on YouTube. And again, please visit patreon.com/Sooners360817 to subscribe for more recruiting content and to support this podcast. Thanks again.